So today we will learn about phylogeny. We'll see the methods of phylogenetic tree reconstruction. So I hope all of you understand what the phylogeny is. Phylo stands for phylum, the class. The geny is coming from Genesis, which stands for origin. Now, before we move on to the different methods of phylogenetic analysis, I wanted to show you one picture from Origin of Life from Darwin. So this is one tree that Darwin envisioned in his book, where he proposed that all life on this planet actually came from a single life, and we all are descendant from that single life. So he envisioned the whole life form which is present on these terminal today is actually hierarchically evolved from a single common ancestor. So the whole idea of phylogeny is actually coming from Darwin. So all right, so let's talk about phylogeny in little detail. Uh, what do you think? How would we define mammals? So what traits of mammals we should look into so that we can say that this class of life belongs to mammals. So for long, people have been talking about uh, a few traits which are specific to mammals. For example, so even today, in many of the books, you will find this that the traits which are unique to mammals is one is that they produce milk, right? And the other is that they have hair, and some people also say that they are quadrupedals. Well, if you think that these are the fundamental traits of a mammal, then by these two criteria, which has been the prime criteria for long, long time, somebody somebody can say that the coconut is a mammal, right? Now, of course, you can put forward a lot of arguments that coconut is actually not an independent animal, is the part of a tree, and so on. And so the coconut is not a mammal. But let us not go to that level. But still, I mean, if you think that these are the criteria, or let's say you can have another criteria, say they are land animal, right? Then how do you, if these are the criterias, then many of these are not true when you go to whale. They may not be true with many other marine animals, as say dolphins or what is that, manatee, the sea lion, right? So they don't have four legs, right? They don't live on land, so these animals are actually not living on land. They are not quadrupedals. They are not having hair, but of course they produce milk. So what does this tell you? It tells you that uh, you need to first find the traits which should suit to the classification uh, or phylogeny across different life form, or you should look for sufficiently large number of traits. Okay, so of course if you look for sufficiently large number of traits, then perhaps you will classify these as mammals. But one of the trait that you can look into to which is quite reliable uh, across many phylums is uh, the way animal reproduction, right? So reproduction can be one trait which can be actually used to classify many life form. For example, in mammals we have vivipary, right? So we have placental system for reproduction. So all the animals, including whales, dolphin, manatee, human, chimpanzees, dogs, cows, and every other mammal has vivipary. So we need to know that uh, when it comes to phylogeny through physical traits, we should know what traits we should look for classification. So identification of correct trait, the appropriate trait is very important. Okay, let's say we look at the reproductive system of few animals, and let's see whether we are able to classify them or not. So let's say my system is I want to identify which came first, chicken or egg. Okay, when I say which came first means uh, during evolution, right? So let us assume that I am looking at two animals, two life forms. One is, let's say, chicken, and other is, let's say, rabbit. Now, chicken we know is laying egg, right? So they have egg system, and here you have vivipary, right? So there is a placenta, and then the embryo is inside the womb, and so on. So what was the common ancestor of these two systems? So one way you can look at it is, you might say that okay, the common system was vivipary only. That is one possibility, right? And these two are descendant of vivipary. So vivipary was ancestral. There is one possibility, right? Whether this is correct or not, we'll see later on. And what has happened in the evolution, the vivipary has been lost in the chicken lineage. What is the other possibility? The other possibility is that uh, we have chicken over here, and we have a rabbit over here. And the common ancestor was laying eggs, right? So egg was ancestral. Okay, so what has happened in the evolution? That this egg system, egg laying system, was lost in rabbit lineage, right? Now we have one change in either of these two trees, small trees, right? Now the bigger question that we have now is which one is correct, right? So which means that if I take a very limited set of organism and try to find the common ancestor or try to infer the phylogeny, we might fail, right? So let us say I have another organism now, which is, let's say, platypus. Now, before we talk about platypus, what do you think? What is platypus? Duckbill platypus. So, if we try to draw it, how does it look like roughly? This is roughly the duckbill platypus, right? So, if you look at this part of this organism, if you look at this part, some of the people might say that, oh, well, this looks like a duck. So, this might be coming from a Aves lineage. And since the other part of the organism looks like reptile, so this might be somewhere in between of bird and reptile. It turns out to be grossly incorrect because this is not made up of, this is not the material of the uh, of this part of the organism is not same as the beaks of birds. Okay, so this is made up of some other material, and this is you might be the function of this is also very different than what the function of bird's beak is. This is sensory in nature, a lot of neurons over there which goes to brain, and the fundamental material is very very different than the collagen kind of material that you see in the bird's beak. So this is sensory, and the duckbill doesn't use its eyes and nose and ears to find food. They are looking for food and their partner through this uh, beak, and they lay down on the ground and move by laying down its beak on the ground to find out the food, right? So this is for search or navigation. It's very different than what you have in bird, all right? And then they might be reptile, and one of the reason people say this is reptile is because they are egg laying, right? So they are laying eggs, so it has to be reptile. So uh, this cannot be mammal because there is no vivipary, right? One of the reproductive trait common for the mammals. However, there is another reason, another trait that I didn't talk about earlier of mammals is the one of the trait of mammals. I can write over here also. Let's say mammary or mammary gland. Right. So you might say that if duckbill is not having mammary glands, this would be a more closer to reptile rather than to mammals, right? So it turns out they were not having the initially there was this question among scientists whether they have mammary glands or not. Many scientists said they don't have. Others said that they have seen it. So then the hypothesis came that they might have it, which is shrinking in some season and expanding in other season and so on. But it was clear that they had no, there were these glands because that's how the milk is formed. Whether or not they were secreting milk or not was discovered later on. Now, they certainly didn't had mammae, the nipples. Okay, they were not present. So, and then the question was, if the nipples are not there, then even if the milk is out there, how it is being secreted? So, people dismiss the hypothesis that platypus could be anyway closer to mammals. Then, of course, the platypus is observed in Australia. So, one of the British Army personnel once caught a female uh, duckbill, and somehow in an accident it died. So people used to peel the skin so that they can stuff it up for museum purpose. So during that process of peeling the skin, he saw that the milk poured out. Okay, so it turned out that it was secreting milk, but it was secreting through skin. Okay, it was in more of diffused form, and the offsprings were diffuse form rather than in the nipple form. So the offsprings were licking the skin of the mother to feed on, right? So it was now it is now clear by also by looking at the reproductive system inside. How does it look like? It is clear that it is more closer to reptile and mammal. Okay, it is certainly not mammal because there is no vivipary. It turns out that they are monotremes. Mono stand for single, treme stand for hole, which means that they have a single hole in females, unlike the placental mammals. So the reproductive system clearly places the platypus in between reptile and mammal. It's a unique living fossil that you can think of, the transition point between reptile and mammals. So Darwin had a problem. He had an elegant theory of natural selection, but then people were saying that where are the intermediate forms, right? So why don't we see them in the nature? So Darwin used to say that they have evolved, they have diverged so much that we can't find the intermediate form because they are fossilized. They were present somewhere in between in the evolution, the ancestral forms, but they are now fossilized. They are extinct. But here are a couple of examples along with the platypus, which supported Darwin's theory. All right, now, so we were here. Now think of that we now have a platypus also in this system. All right, so then how do we classify? How do we make the phylogenetic inference? So now let us say we have a platypus also. So we have platypus, hen, and rabbit. And if we assume that the ancestral form was let's say again the vivipary, then what has happened in the evolution? So either vivipary was uh, present and it continued in rabbit, okay, and then hen and platypus lost them, right? So these two have lost them, right? So which means that platypus and hen have lost it. So there is a loss of viviparity there, but it continued in rabbit. The other possibility is that there was an egg system, and it continued to be the egg system in platypus and hen, but it is lost in rabbit. So which one do you think is more likely a phenomena? So here you need two changes over here, right? And here you need just one change. So the egg system is lost, but the placental system was gained, the vivipary was gained, right? Vivipary is gained here. So this looks a bit confusing if you go back over to this picture now. Let's say that just to simplify the thing here. So let us say that uh, you had platypus here. So which means that if vivipary was ancestral, then this is lost in platypus as well as in chicken, but it is maintained in rabbit. However, if you had the same thing over here, platypus, and the egg was ancestral, right? So then it is clear that this egg system was lost here and vivipary was gained. Now this is a better representation. So what do you see? Which one is more likely to have this system to evolve from vivipary to what we have drawn over here, the loss of vivipary in platypus? You need two changes, right? You need two changes over here, two mutations or two mutation, the mutation in two systems, two independent lineages, right? Here you need only one, right? So it seems that this represents a much simpler explanation to what we observe as compared to this one. So which means that, that's what we call to present a simplest to a tree, a phylogenetic tree which represents, which explains the observation in the simplest form or parsimonial form is known as parsimony. Parsimony. So this is the parsimony way of looking at phylogeny, which means that the system which can be explained through a tree with minimum mutations is the correct one. All right. Now you might say, well, this is also possible. Now parsimony method doesn't tell you that this is not possible. Okay, it is possible, but this is less likely. Okay, this is a, it's a difficult explanation to what you see. This is a simpler explanation, and we go by this simpler one. So this is more likely, this is less likely. It's not like this is incorrect and this is correct. That's what the parsimony approach to phylogeny is. So you can have, so basically now you can have a parsimonial approach to phylogenetic tree construction. Parsimony method. That's one of the method of phylogenetic tree reconstruction. Now, as I said, if you are looking at traits, then you have to look at sufficiently large number of traits. Okay, and for many of the species, those traits may not be characterized. A better way after the sequencing era is to have sequences, right? So you have DNA or protein sequences with you, and then you can use those sequences to reconstruct the phylogenetic tree. So let us assume that I have some data over here. So I have, let's say, human, chimp, and mouse, tiger and mouse. Right, so let's say the sequence is following. This sequence is uh, let's say, I mean, this can be a long sequence, but I'm only talking about a small chunk just for the sake of explanation. There's TG here, and then this was AG here and AG here. Okay, now in phylogenetic tree reconstruction, you should remember one thing: the sites which are highly conserved or poorly conserved, they are not informative. For example, this is not informative, right? It's not, because it's conserved, so it's not talking about difference, not informative. And if there is a site which is highly changing, let's say there was a site over here, um, somewhere here, which was ATGC, which is all changing, so this is also not very informative. Okay, the sites which are informative are the ones which are showing clade specific changes. Okay, more informative, which are showing clade means a certain group in phylogenetic tree. We'll talk about those terms in after we are done with the methods. Now, if this is the data, then what are the possibilities? What is my phylogenetic tree? What is my phylogenetic tree? Right? Okay, so Right. So there can be different possibility that we can make a different kind of trees out there. Let us say that I made one tree over here. Let's say that look like following. Where I put T here, which is tiger, human here, chimpanzee here, and mouse here. Right? And let's say I'm using this site for the time being for phylogenetic inference. Okay. Now I know that in human it is T here, right? It is T here. It is A here in the sequence, T here, and A here. Now think of if the T was my ancestral sequence. Okay, if T is the ancestral sequence, it means that there has to be one mutation here. That's why it became A, T2A, right? So this is your T2A mutation here. And then there has to be one mutation over here, which is again T2A, isn't it? And then this remains same over there. So it requires two mutations. Now think of that. Think of a scenario where I have A as the ancestral letter, ancestral sequence. So then A remains A here, no mutation, but A has to change to T across this lineage, right? So then there is a change from A to T here. And then A remains A over here, but there you need a mutation over here. So in either case, the number of mutations that you need to um, get this uh, leaf nodes explained, okay, would be 2, right? So the number of mutations, minimum number of mutations that you need to get this tree, get the explanation to this grouping, that the way we have grouped them is 2. Okay, now you can also have a more number of trees like that, but let us consider, you can think of more number of trees, right, and calculate how many mutations were there, minimum number of mutations needed uh, for each of those trees. But just to simplify, let us say I now came up with one tree. This is out of multiple possibilities, which looks like this: human, chimp, tiger, and mouse. So now we know that what is the sequence for human. This is T here, T here, A here, and A here. Now consider that my ancestral letter was T, then how many mutations do we need? So this branch remains T, right? And then I can have one mutation. I need to have one mutation across this from T to A, and then one mutation here from T to A. However, it will be interesting to see that what happens if my ancestral letter was A. Then no change over here, no change over here. I need one change over here, right? So which means that I need to have A to T change on this branch. Just one change if my ancestral letter was A. One change. And according to parsimony method, parsimonial approach, this should be the tree, right? And we know that human is closer to chimp as compared to tiger and mouse, right? And so this is the way parsimonial method works. Now you might wonder that then there are multiple sites that we will be considering removing. The uninformative sites, these sites we remove, highly conserved or highly varying sites we remove, and so there are methods to do that. But how do we take care of so many sites and so many trees. So basically you construct you come up with this table. So you will have a table like this, a kind of data structure, and on one side your x-axis represents the sites, right, and your y-axis represents the trees, alternate trees. Okay. And what we are going to fill up here is the number of mutations, minimum number of mutations needed in each of those trees across each of those. Let's say I took second site in my alignment and the fifth site or the 10th site and let's say 15th site or whatever the informative sites that I'm looking into. And then I look for the trees, this is T1, T2, all the alternate phylogenetic trees, T4 and so on, right? And then you fill it up. Let's say here I needed one mutation, I needed two mutations, one mutations here, one mutation here, and then T2 was having three here, four here, one here, five here. This was having two, two, one, two, and so on. And then you sum it up. Okay, so you sum it up, which explains which of these tree is showing the minimal value. So in this case, this is going to be 5 here, the sum here, 13 here, 7 here. So I know that my T1 was explaining the observation. So that will be my tree according to parsimonial method. All right. So this is one method, the parsimonial approach. There's another method called neighbor joining. So this is known as neighbor joining method. This is somewhat similar, not entirely, somewhat similar to what you learn in the guide tree, in the progressive alignment. The initial step is similar to guide tree, but then we do something else. Okay, so how does this work? So let us assume again we have three organisms over here. The first step is to calculate the distance between organisms. Okay, let us assume I have A, B, C, D, and E, and I have certain sequence here. Let's say AA, CT, C, AA, GTC, and TA, GTT, and so on. Now let us say that for these three sequences, how can we get the distance matrix? We calculate distance. As I mentioned in one of the class, calculating distances between sequences is not difficult. So it is simple. Let's say you now construct a matrix over here, distance matrix, which will have A, B, C, and so on, and again A, B, C, and so on. So this is of course meaningless. Self to self is meaningless over here. But then you need to see, let's say A to B, how many changes are there in this multiple sequence alignment. A to B, A to B. So how many changes are there? It's just one change. So you put 1 over here, right? A to C, how many? A to C, one change, two changes, and three changes. So you put 3 here. So of course this is symmetrical. So 1, 3. And B to C, how many? 1 and 2. this is C, here is 2, so we have 2. Likewise you can do it for the whole alignment. So once you get this, you have to do some kind of scaling of this by the net divergence. So net divergence of each of these species can be calculated by summing up or averaging each of these columns, right? So A to B, A to C, and what is the net divergence can be calculated by taking the whole of this column, right? And likewise for the others. So we use this equation to do that. So normalized by, this is like normalized by net divergence, okay. So this can be calculated by following equation. So you say M, this is the matrix that we'll get after the normalization. M of two sequences A and B will be given by distance of A and B coming from this matrix minus divergence. So divergence of, let's say, A, divergence of A, okay, plus divergence of B, okay, and this divided by n minus 2. That's the normalization. So n means total number of species. Here is 5 species minus 2 is 3 over here. So this is the way you subtract the, it's like when you do the mean polishing, median centering, mean centering of the data is somewhat similar to that. Okay, so this will give you another matrix which will have these values, M values, right? So you get another matrix which is normalized one, M matrix, right? Now from this M matrix we are going to construct, I need some space over here. Okay, so we can actually go to, so okay, so I'll go to next page. So before that we use these distances and a lot of those values will be negative. Okay, that's fine, that doesn't create any problem. So the first step is that we make a hub, a pseudo node, and we say there is a H node which is a hub to which all my sequences are connected. All 5 sequences are connected to hub. This is A, B, C, D, E. Right, so let's go to the next page now. So this is a simple thing, right? I didn't do anything. I use uh, these species and connected them to. So this is not actually, I'm not deriving any information from this matrix to get this, but I will use in a while. Okay, so this is just the one first step where I connect all these sequences to one a pseudo node called H for the time. It's not actually pseudo node. This will, in the end, you will see that this will be ancestral node. Okay, so we have this with us with H. All my sequences are connected to H node. Now the first thing that you need to do here is to find out the closest pair here, okay, based on this M matrix. In this matrix, find out the lowest value, and let us assume that lowest value belong to A and B. Right, so then I need to club them together. What is the method of clubbing them together, right? So how do I club them together? The way we do this is by introducing another node. Okay, so I introduce another node to which I connect A and B. My A and B node, I connect them to another node here, which is a new node. Let us call it as U. Okay, and rest of the tree remains same. So this is connected to H, right? H is connected to CDE. Okay, now since I have a new node, I need to calculate the distance of this node, which is actually representing, U node is nothing but representing this group AB, right? This is representing the group AB, right? So U is somehow representing the group AB. So I need to calculate the distance of AB group to all other nodes. So how many nodes are left? C, D, E, right? We don't touch H. Okay, so we calculate the distance of the U node, which is representing AB group, to the other nodes. The way we do this is following. So I'm going to use this equation now. Distance of U to, let's say, I calculate for C. You need to calculate for all of them. Will be given by distance of A to C, okay, plus B to C. Okay, so D of A to C plus distance of B to C, okay, minus the distance of A to B, this distance that we had. Right, so so you can use this, but the correct equation is to divide it by 2. Okay, so that will be the distance between C and AB group. Okay, and likewise you calculate for D of U to D. These are very straightforward equations, okay, of calculating distances. It's not even Euclidean distance. This is similar derivations of Hamming distance. And then U to E. Okay, what next? So we have to represent these distances now in the matrix form again. So we are going to have this matrix. Now this time the number of nodes will be U, C, D, E. Only 4 nodes. U, C, D, E. And we got the distances among them. You get these distances and you again normalize this to make M by average divergence and all. And then go to the next step. The next step is following. We have the repetition, the same thing, right? So now let us say I found that the minimal value was in this M matrix. The minimal value was AB to C, which means U to C. Okay, so which means that I had this connection over here, which was A to B, U, and now I need to connect the U node to C node through another node, right? So which means I need to introduce another node here, let's say V node. Okay, and likewise we continue. The rest of the tree remains same, which means you have H here and DE here, right? So let us assume that over the time we learned that DE got connected to each other and then we got a tree. Now let us say this is my final tree. For the time being, assume that this is my final tree. What you find is that this tree is unrooted, which means that the kind of tree that we were drawing earlier, the kind of tree that you get to see in most literature is like following, right? So most of those trees are in the following form, which is, let's say, one such tree, right? But right now what we have is a kind of unrooted tree, which can be somewhat like this. Okay, now there's one extra branch here, so we can just rub it. All right, so how do we actually get this tree? The rooted tree, where we have a root over here, right? This is the root over here. From the unrooted tree, one of the ways that if you know the branch length, then you find a point over here which is equidistant. Okay, so if you know the branch length here, which is basically the divergence time. Okay, talk about that later. So then you will get the point somewhere in the tree which is equidistant from all the nodes, and then that's just root. A better way is to look for uh, look for a outgroup. Okay, so I'll give you this example. uh, let's assume that we had uh, we had uh, human, mouse, dog, and then we had the fly over here. Okay, so if you introduce a out group, this is called out group. Okay, which is very distant from the uh, other species in the tree. Now we put the, if we have a out group, this is my out group. So let's say, if I just to explain you what is the out group for all the mammals. Of course, the fly is far away. But let us say this is not fly. Okay, so this is, let's say, or platypus. Platypus will be out group for all the mammals, right? So platypus is the outgroup, fly is the outgroup. Fly is far away, so it's not a good idea to go that distant. Let's say we have taken platypus as the outgroup here. So we put the root. We have to put the root, which is the common universal ancestor, on the branch which is representing the outgroup, right? So then my tree would be following. So now this tree would look like following. I have human and mouse together, the rooted form, and then they are connected to dog. These are my mammals, and this is going to be my platypus over here, and this is my root. So these are the ways. One of the way was to find out uh, the point which is equidistant to all the species in the tree. The other one is to put the point which uh, which marks the outgroup. So these are the ways of converting unrooted tree to a rooted tree. So these are more popular, but sometimes you also see unrooted tree in the research papers. But these are the trees which are more popular in the literature. Okay, so we are done with two of the methods. One is the parsimony, and the other is the neighbor joining method. Okay, so let's look at the one more method, which is the last method. So I can tell you the most popular methods are the parsimonial method and the maximum likelihood method. Okay, so now let's look at the maximal uh, maximum likelihood method. All right, so maximum likelihood, you have already seen one example in the HMM class. if you recall, we looked at something something like that. What is the probability that we see 666 in the toss of a dice given the hidden states LLL, right? So this was changing, right? And then we need to find out which one is the correct one, right? Out of many possibilities. So this is very similar to what you learned earlier. So what we say here is following: what is the probability which explains the data? Okay, what is the probability? So in maximum likelihood, we are looking at what is the probability of observing the data, which is my multiple sequence alignment given a particular tree, right? So the thing is that I know this thing, but I do not know this tree, and this is what the objective of this method is, to find out that. Okay, so let's look at the example again. So let's say I have certain sequences uh, A, B, C, D, and these were the nucleotides. So I'll only focus on one nucleotide. This is again in your multiple sequence alignment. Let's say this is what I am working with. Okay, this is what the MSA is. So this is what the MSA is. And let us say I come up with one tree. So for the sake of explanation, we will work with one tree, but then we have to work for many more trees to find out which tree is giving this, which tree is maximizing this. Okay, so of course you need to maximize this, right? Maximize this. Okay, let us assume for the time being that I have this tree with me. My terminal nodes are A, B, C, D, and let us assume that in one of the scenario, in one of the possible trees, this is connected to E, and these are connected to F, and these two are further connected to ancestral node G. Again, I know the leaf nodes, so these are my leaves, right? So I know what the sequence is. This is G, this is G, this is T, and this is G again. Now the question is, what is the sequence here, what is the sequence here, and what is the sequence here? And that's what we try to calculate in maximum likelihood. Okay, so we use the Markov property. Let us say that if I know the sequence of G, let us say it was A, this is the node name G, and the sequence was A, then given the sequence of G, what will be the likelihood that I get E? Okay, so that's the Markov property that we use, right? We are using Markov property here. From, if I know the sequence of G, I will be able to calculate E, the most likely sequence of E. And the way it works is following: I can calculate the maximum likelihood by following method. My maximum likelihood will be again the probability of G node being, let us say in this case A, right, times probability of E being A given that G was A, times probability of F being A given that G is A, and times we will go to the leaf nodes now. What is the probability of A being, let's say it is G, we already know the A node is G, right? So we know that this is G. Given that my E was A, and what is the probability that my B node is G given that my E is A? Likewise, what is the probability that C is equal to T given that my F node is, because they are connected to F, they are connected to F here, right? So we are following this structure. F is A, probability of D being G given that my F is A, right? Now we can't stop with A here, and we can't stop with A here. We can't stop with A here and A here, A here, right? We need to look at all different possibilities, which means that we don't stop here. So we say plus, so we go by plus uh, probability of G is equal to T and so on, right? All possible ATGC combinations over here, okay? So plus P of G being G and so on, all the ancestral state. We look at all possible combination. So how many combination are we going to look at? So ATGC are the 4 possible combination that we look at, and how many internal nodes are there for which we need to look at combinations. These are known, right? The combinations need to be looked for 1, 2, 3 nodes, right? So how many internal nodes do we have if the total number of nodes is n? So here we have 4 and internal nodes are 3, which means 4 minus 1 is equal to the number of internal nodes. So if you so this is related to graph theory. This is one of the theorem there. So the number of internal node is n minus 1, and the possible nucleotides that we have at particular position is 4. So this is going to be total number of combination is 4 n minus 1. And for each of these combination, how many calculations are we doing? We are doing this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So 7, if the terminal nodes were 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, or n, right? Terminal nodes are n. Then how many calculations we will have? This tells you that you have n plus 3, which for internal nodes, right? So n is 4 plus 3 is 7. So 7 different calculations we do. So this has to be done. This has to be done for each one of them, which means n plus n minus 1. That's why it is 7, right? So these many calculations we have to do, right, to calculate for one particular position. And remember, we just looked at one particular position, and if I have another position, let's say CCAC here somewhere, okay, then the probability, the ML that we calculated here, okay, the total probability needs to be multiplied by this probability, because these are independently evolving position, independent events. So we have to look at joint distribution, joint probability. However, one itself is taking this much calculations, which means that we need to find some trick over here, which is somehow uh, reducing the number of calculation, number one. And even then it will, if the sequence length is long enough, the number of sequences are also sufficient enough, we have to go for optimization, okay. So one thing that you can see here is that if I am done with the E, why not do some kind of recursion here? Let's say if my E is determined, if this is determined, then it doesn't change, right? So then we can do the things recursively. If I have calculated this tree, the ML for this tree, if that is calculated, I don't have to calculate it again. But what we are doing here in all different combinations over here, we look for those probabilities again and again, which means that there is some kind of redundancy in these calculations. So we can actually do one thing. I can calculate, let us say in this case, for this node, for this subtree, I calculate the ML. What is the maximum likelihood? So I calculated, let's say, ML for uh, E node, given that my parent was, because you remember we are using the Markonian property here, so this value can only be calculated if I know G, right? So what we do is we calculate ML given that my parent is, let's say in this case, A. Okay, the G node was A. This parent is nothing but G, right? So I can do this, right? So I can also do it for the, if the G is T, and I can also do it if the G is G and for C. So I got the ML values for E, isn't it? And likewise I can do it uh, for the ML values of F, right? Given that my parent is A, T, G, C. So I can actually get these values done, right? So if I have calculated these once, I don't have to recalculate in every calculation. Okay. So I store them once for each subtree. And then what we do, we calculate the overall ML. Okay, see the overall maximum likelihood would be what? So that will be given by probability of observing G, probability that G was A, right? Times, now I can use ML, right? So this ML would represent this part over here, right? So I say ML of E, given that the parent was, or the G was A, right? Times ML of F, given that my G was A, right? So you reduce the work. So likewise you do it for T, G and C, and the only thing which will change here is this letter, right? T, G, C, and likewise you will change this T, G, C. So you have reduced the total number of combination, and this, it turns out that the total number of combination is somewhat proportional to the total number of nodes. Okay, so this is having, the complexity of this is roughly linear. Okay. This is much more feasible, yet uh, if the number of sequences, number of possible trees are increasing, if these trees, there are a number of possible trees for a given set of data, which will depend on how many sequences you have, how long the sequence is, and so on. The calculations can be enormous. So basically you have to do optimization, right? So you use hill climbing kind of method. Okay, now when it comes to optimization, it can be your choice, right? So whether you want hill climbing method or simulated annealing method, genetic algorithm is generally not preferred because it's very lazy because of the inherent nature. The way it works is relatively uh, lazy. So hill climbing method can be used here, and over the time, I think in one of the class you will learn maybe simulated annealing and conjugate gradient kind of methods during energy minimization class by Shashi. So you will get to know more of these methods, optimization methods. The another thing that people do is that once, let us say you converge to a tree, let's say you converge to a final tree that this is giving the maximum likelihood, and this is the likely tree. You also try to look at uh, if how often can you really see this tree randomly, okay, by randomly shuffling the order of sequences in your multiple sequence alignment. If you shuffle them randomly and tweak the data and then try to see whether you get the same tree or not, okay, and you find out how, let us say you did 10,000 shuffling of the data, okay, various kind of shuffling of the data, and you find that out of 10,000 only once or twice you see a tree which is similar to your tree, then it means that you really got a tree which is not expected by chance. That's called bootstrapping step. The objective of this class was largely to explain you what are the approaches to construct the phylogenetic tree. Now, as I mentioned, once you get the phylogenetic tree, need to know a few things. For example, uh, the outgroup I mentioned already. The platypus would be outgroup for the uh, mammals. Uh, you sometime hear about something called homology, right? This can be used in terms of sequence or trait or phenotype. So homology can be divided into two uh, different kind of homologies. One is the orthology. These are important concepts in bioinformatics and phylogeny and paralogy. So how are they different? Some of you might already know, but it is important to mention here because orthology, paralogy is coming from phylogenetic tree. So the orthology is basically, let us say you had a human insulin and you had the mouse insulin, and there will be some sequence similarity, right? So you can have, if they share a common ancestor, okay, that's the orthology. Two genes, sorry, one gene, two different organism, okay, one gene, two different organism, okay, with the common ancestry. Now, what is paralogy? Paralogy would be, uh, let's say, insulin gene, human, let's say insulin 1 and human insulin 2. Okay, I don't know. I think there are two different versions, or even if there aren't, let us assume a hypothetical scenario that there are two kind of insulins, which are duplicated, right? So they have common ancestry, right? Sometime in the evolution, there was one insulin and it got duplicated. So two different genes, same organism is paralogy. Okay, so they share the common ancestry. Now, when it comes to uh, okay, duplication, there can be two kinds of duplication. One is the segmental duplication, where you had, let's say, this particular chunk got duplicated. Okay, and that duplication can happen through multiple means. You can have non-homologous recombination, errors in replications, and so on, and you can get segmental duplication. So segmental duplicates. Okay, so the other thing is you can have the whole genome duplication. Okay, whole genome duplication. So if your paralogs are coming through whole genome duplication, we call them as onologs. So you remember I talk about this Japanese scientist Ono. So he has been working on whole genome duplication. So these paralogs coming due to uh, paralogs evolved due to whole genome duplications are called onologs. And it's not very difficult to find out whole genome what are the genes which have evolved due to or duplicated due to whole genome duplication. So if you look at uh, let's say human genome, let's say this is human genome. I'm representing all different chromosome on a circle, okay, and you look at the cross similarity within the genome itself. Okay, you do the blast of certain chunks of DNA to the human genome itself, human DNA to human DNA alignment. Okay, you take, let's say, this chunk and do the blast to rest of the thing, and so on. There are other approaches also where you can have a genome to genome alignments and so on. So if you do so, it turns out that you will find chunks which are mapping over here, and then the same is mapping elsewhere over here. So, and this could be matching to this one, and this could be matching to this one. So you get, let us say this was some cluster of genes, okay, some cluster. So you get this kind of structure which is a quadrat structure, right? So you are getting 4 different chunks in the genome which are having some sequence similarity. So you get this 4 different chunks because there were two rounds of whole genome duplication, right? This is an important information that if you try to look at certain regions in the genome, you can actually identify how many whole genome duplications ever happened in the evolutionary history of that organism. Just to highlight the approach by which we identify whole genome duplications. So apart from this, there are other terms. For example, we have something called monophyletic and polyphyletic. Monophyletic species and polyphyletic species. So let us say you have a tree uh, which is like this. So the monophyletic would be the if all the, let us say there are A, B, C, 3 species, if all the species in that group share a common ancestor. So this will be called as monophyletic. Right. So if you, there is another term called paraphyletic. So if you purposely wants to ignore one or few of these species, let's say you only take these two and tend to ignore some of the species which are in the same group, then those are called as paraphyletic. Okay, and if you are looking at species which are not having common ancestry, let's say EF, you took these two and you took these two, all right, and ignore lot of the other species, then those are known as polyphyletic. Now you might say that, well, they have common ancestor here, this is the common ancestor, but then we don't call it as monophyletic because we didn't take E, H and others, right? So this is not monophyletic, because in monophyletic all the descendants of the common ancestors are grouped together, all of them are considered. So that's the difference between mono and poly, right? So these are the some important terms which people keep on asking in interviews and examinations and so on. All right, so that was all for the day. I hope you are following the Shashi's classes, and I will see. We need to coordinate the timing of the assignments now. what Shashi is giving and what I have to give you. I need to give you one or two more assignments and then I'm done with this part.